Jenny Wren, the story that I learned from Eugene Haley Peterson's book, Window in the Rock. Now this is a story of the Great Depression, the hungry 30s, a time when banks failed, family fortunes, life savings were lost in the blink of an eye, and it seemed as though the entire male population was on the move, crisscrossing Canada from one end to the other in an endless, hopeless quest for work. Now, one of the only industries that continued to flourish during these lean years was that of gold mining, and there were several claims in operations right here in the Kootenays. Now, around these parts, when you find gold, it's always up in high elevations, making access difficult at the best of times, much less during the harsh conditions during winter. So it only made sense to have everything and everyone you needed right up there at the mine. So as well as miners, well, you'd also find millmen, timbermen, first aid attendants, blacksmiths, teamsters, tramsters, shift bosses, cooks and assistants, and of course, the mine managers and office staff, making for a veritable, independent little community, nestled snugly high in the alpine ranges. Now, there weren't a lot of opportunities for women in the mines at those times, so the populations of these little enclaves were mostly male, except for the odd hardy wife. But every once in a while, a mine manager might hire a lady as a cook. And then, well, she'd be a lot more likely to hire herself a couple of younger women to serve as her flunkies. And that is exactly how it came to be that young Jenny Brown secured herself a position as camp cook's assistant at the Second Relief Mine. Now, I believe it was Napoleon who said that an army marches on its stomach. And well, a camp of hungry miners was no different. Any mine manager worth his pay would make sure that he got himself the best cook he could. Some of the finest chefs in the land could be found cooking in the camps, and the food would often rival that of a five-star hotel. Any miner coming home from a long, hard day working down deep in the mines could always count on dinner being a highlight of the day. Any cook who couldn't satisfy those hungry miners would soon find they'd been given their walking papers in very short order. Now, Jenny was a shy young thing, but she was mighty glad of that job. $3.50 a week, plus her room and board. Well, that sounded like a pretty good deal to her. She was a little apprehensive about the idea of being one of only 2 young women working in a camp of over 50 men. But it turned out she needn't have worried. They one and all treated her with nothing but kindness and courtesy. Mrs. Olson, the cook, was a fair woman to work for, and her fellow flunky Hazel was an outgoing girl, plenty fun, easy to get along with. Jenny herself was a kind-hearted and hard-working young lass. Her cheery disposition and ever willingness to lend a hand soon endeared her to the entire crew. Big Swede, the camp handyman, took her right under his wing like she was his very own little sister. It was he that christened her Jenny Wren, on account of her habit of always being found softly but sweetly singing as she went about her duties. Well, a flunky's life was not for the faint of heart, nor weak of constitution. The cooking staff worked 12-hour shifts. They were up before anyone else in camp, getting the fires lit and the stoves warm. Breakfast had to be on the table by 7 a.m., and then, of course, it had to be all cleaned up. By 9, they'd get a short break, and then at 10, they were back at it again, getting ready for lunch, usually soup and biscuits, and they'd take that right up to the mine. And then there's another short break. The rest of the afternoon was spent baking. Those miners could eat a big pile of cakes and pies, and, of course, dinner had to be on the table at 5:30. Then it was clean up one last time in order to be ready to do the whole thing again the next day. It wasn't an easy life, but Jenny had never been afraid of hard work. She was so proud to have that job when there were so few to be found. Every week, she was pleased as punch to send a large portion of her pay packet home to help make ends meet. Well, life soon settled into a routine, and the times flew quickly by. Jenny's favorite days were when she and Hazel got to accompany Mrs. Olson and Big Swede into Nelson to go and pick up supplies for the camp. Mrs. Olson was a very good-natured young lady, and she'd always give Jenny and Hazel a bit of time off to themselves to go and have a little fun. Off you go now, girls, she'd shoo them along. Now, I remember what it is to be young, but stay out of trouble, and mind you're back to meet us at 3:30 sharp at the dry goods store. Don't be late. Off the girls would go. They'd usually head up to Baker Street to do some window shopping, looking at all the wonderful fine things to be seen in the store windows. One day, Jenny and Hazel were admiring the beautiful jewelry in J.B. Gray's jewelry store when Jenny saw it. It was a beautiful silver lady's watch. Oh, slender and delicate. It was the prettiest thing she'd ever seen. Well, before she knew what had happened, Hazel had grabbed her by the arm and dragged her in the store and was asking the clerk if she could try on that watch, just like they were real customers. Well, slim and elegant, it sparkled on Jenny's wrist. It was the sort of watch a fine lady would wear to an elegant high society soiree. Jenny felt like a bit of an imposter with it there on her wrist. But Hazel was busy asking the clerk how much it was, and then telling him in a haughty voice, well, we'll have to think it over. And then, bam, they were back out on the boardwalk, walking arm in arm down the street like it had just been a brief dream. You know, Jenny, you've hardly spent any money since you came to the mine, except for what you've sent home. Why, I bet with what you've got set aside already, it'd be hardly any time at all before you had enough to buy that watch for yourself. Jenny laughed. Spent $17.50 on a watch? When I can buy a perfectly serviceable timepiece from the Eaton's catalog for $1.99? Well, Hazel, what are you thinking? Where would I wear it? To dinner in the mess hall? Why, the fellas would think I was putting on airs. Hazel tossed her hair dismissively. Who cares what anyone thinks? I don't. Besides, Jenny, why shouldn't you have something nice to wear just once in your life? I mean, I could never save up enough to buy a fine watch like that, but you sure could. Jenny smiled. They both knew that Hazel's pay packet tended to burn a bit of a hole in her purse on each trip to town. Whereas Jenny had been raised in a large family during those lean years, she never could remember there ever being enough to go around, much less her husband having her father having a steady job. The family motto had always been, use it up, wear it out, make it do or do without. It was a lifelong habit that Jenny found hard to break, without feeling that she was being most extravagantly wasteful. Well, Hazel didn't say anything else, but all the way back to camp, and for the next couple of days, her words kept echoing in Jenny's ears, along with the memory of how lovely that watch had looked on her wrist. Hazel was quite right. With what she had set aside already, it wouldn't take all that long to get the rest. Why, in just a few months, by late summer, she could buy it for herself as a birthday present. And why not? Why not indeed? And that's what Jenny decided to do. Every trip to town after that, she'd make sure she'd always pass by J.B. Gray's jewelry store to have a lingering look in the window at what she began to think of as her watch. Well, the months passed by, and finally the day came when Jenny had enough money to buy the watch. Well, she couldn't wait for the next trip to town, which just happened to fall on the very day of her birthday. Well, the drive into Nelson seemed to take twice as long as usual, and it felt like forever before Mrs. Olson finally dismissed the girls. But she did, and Jenny was off like a shot up the hill to Baker Street. Her feet fairly flew along the boardwalk till she was in front of the red brick-fronted building. Then she was in the door, and her fingers were fumbling with her purse. This was the day. But much to Jenny's dismay, the watch was gone. The clerk was terribly sorry. He had no idea that Jenny was saving up to buy that watch. Why, the awful part was that it had only sold that very day to a gentleman who was buying it for another young lady for her birthday. If only Jenny had known, just the smallest deposit would have set it aside. But she had no idea. The clerk was so kind. He offered to show Jenny some other watches. But she just didn't even have the heart to look at them. Disappointed and dejected, she drifted back downtown to meet the others and head back to camp. To make matters even worse, it seemed as though not a single soul in camp had remembered that it was Jenny's birthday. It was a very quiet Jenny Wren who was headed for her room for the evening after dinner, when Hazel came bouncing along, telling her that Mrs. Olson needed to see her in the kitchen right now. And, well, you didn't make Mrs. Olson wait. So off went Jenny, and there, to her surprise, she found the entire camp waiting for her, all gathered round Big Swede, who stood there grinning from ear to ear and holding a small blue gift box wrapped in a silver ribbon. They had remembered her birthday after all. Well, Jenny smiled for the first time since leaving the jewelry store and opened up the box. And there was her watch. Jenny just couldn't believe it. Hazel was jumping up and down to tell her so fast that she told Mrs. Olson, and Mrs. Olson had told Big Swede, well, he'd taken up a collection from everyone in the camp, and they put together enough money to buy Jenny the watch of her dreams. Well, Jenny was just overcome with emotion. With tears in her eyes, she could barely stammer out her thanks for this wonderful gift. But Jenny treasured that watch like nothing else she'd ever owned. As she decided that she had to find some way to appropriately express her gratitude for the generosity of these people that she'd come to think of as family. So, the next trip to town, she spent every single penny she'd saved for that watch on all sorts of supplies. And over the next few months, and during her spare time, she was busy as a bee. She was making things. There was mittens and a scarf for Big Swede and a brand new apron for Mrs. Olson. There was a pin cushion for Hazel. There was something for everybody. Winter came early to the Coopies that year. By the beginning of December, there was over 10 feet of snow, and it was coming on fast. Unstable layers deep in the snowpack made for the worst avalanche danger there'd ever been seen in the history of mining in the Kootenays. Even the old-timers couldn't remember there ever being anything like it. Well, 3 days before Christmas, a huge storm system blew in, dumping over 3 feet of snow in less than 24 hours. Well, the next day, the cap skinner and his helper went out to clear the road, only to be back almost immediately, half dead with fright. A big avalanche had come down, just missing the tractor by about a foot, obliterating the road completely and ripping out the phone lines. The camp was now completely cut off from contact with the outside world. Mr. Manning, the mine manager, decreed that no one was to leave the camp for any reason whatsoever, not even those hardy Norwegians on their wooden skis. With plenty of supplies laid in, the camp pulled in and prepared to wait it out. Well, to help make up for everybody missing out on the big celebrations in town, Mrs. Olson and the girls decided that they were going to make a Christmas dinner that couldn't be beat. It would be a feast fit for a king. They were up the next day before 4 a.m. getting things ready. There were 10 huge turkeys with all the trimmings. There were sauces and gravies and 5 kinds of stuffing, a mountain of cakes, pies, tarts, and goodies, and an enormous Christmas pudding that was nothing short of extraordinary. When everything was in readiness, Mrs. Olson dismissed the girls to go and get cleaned up and have a bit of a nap before it was time to serve the dinner. Well, Jenny fairly danced back to her room. She was far too excited to sleep. She brushed out her hair, and she put on that watch, and she changed into her best pale blue pinafore with white lace trim. And then she opened the footlocker at the end of her bed and took out the mountain of presents that she'd made for her friends. Well, Sitting there on her bed with those presents, she could just imagine her friends' faces as they opened those gifts after dinner and truly understood how much she valued their friendship and generosity. Sitting there on that bed with her watch on her wrist, Jenny felt like the luckiest girl in the world. It was quiet in her room, almost unsettlingly so. There were none of the usual sounds of hustle and bustle that were daily life in a mining camp. In fact, even the birds had stopped singing. A hush spread over the mountain as though the very land held its breath. Jenny heard the softest sound, as though a branch were gently brushing against the window. But there was no breeze. The sound came again. And then her world split open, as with a mighty roar that would have drowned out a dozen locomotives. A great white wall smashed through the side of her room. Jenny didn't even have time to scream before the wooden wall splintered into 1,000 pieces like so many broken matchsticks. The wall roof caved in, and a huge beam dropped down towards her like a broken piece of kindling. She felt a searing pain in her forehead. And then she knew no more. When Jenny came to, it was to utter blackness. She was cold, so cold. And no matter how she struggled, she could not move, not so much as her baby finger. It was as though she had been struck blind and deaf and paralyzed all at once. She lay there for what seemed like an eternity, flitting in and out of consciousness. And then she heard a sound, faintly, as though voices muffled through a thick wall several rooms away. It grew louder, and then resolved into the welcome voice of Big Swede, who was saying, thick with emotion, "Here! She is here! I have found her!" And then the light flooded in, as many eager hands scooped the snow away from Jenny, freeing her from her icy tomb. The last thing she remembered before she blacked out once more was Big Swede's tear-streaked face bending over her as he reached down and scooped her up in his powerful arms as though she were only 5 years old. Well, later in the infirmary, Mr. Manning explained what had happened. In the still hours of that early Christmas evening, an enormous avalanche had ripped down half the mountainside right past the camp. By great good luck, it had only taken out the tiniest outermost corner of the farthest outbuilding, Jenny's room, and by some miracle had spared every other building and all the other people in camp. The huge beam that had knocked her unconscious had ridden down the mountainside ahead of her, and when the mighty torrent of snow had spent itself, Jenny had come to rest up alongside it, her face pressed against the wood of the beam. The far end of the timber rose up out of the snow, and the paper-thin crack of air that crept down the side of it brought down just enough air for her to survive. The beam itself was the only clue to her whereabouts that had saved her life. Such was the force of the avalanche that most of her clothing and her watch, her precious watch, had been ripped from her body and swept further down the mountainside. Her room and all its contents, every single gift she worked on with such love, were gone forever. Jenny was beside herself with grief. She knew she should be grateful for escaping from the avalanche with her life, and she was. Oh, she was. But the loss of all those presents and her precious watch seemed almost more than she could bear that Christmas day. A Big Swede tried to comfort her. He told her all the presents in the world were as nothing compared with the gift of having her there with them that Christmas, alive and well. But Jenny could not be consoled. The spring was a long time coming to the Kootenays that year. The daffodils in Victoria had long since bloomed and faded ere the deep snows high in the mountains of the Kootenays finally began to recede.
Jenny took every single opportunity she could to hike down the mountainside following the snow line in search of her belongings. But all she found was one mitten, high in the branches of a larch tree, where it had been hurled by the might of the snow. Of her watch, there was not a trace. Still, the determined young lady refused to give up and followed the retreating of the snow at every chance she had, till finally there was only one mass of it left, down in the lower bowl where the toe of the avalanche had been. It was compressed into gleaming blue ice by the sheer weight of the snowpack and stubbornly resisted the sun's rays. It was one bright, sunny day, late in summer, when the alpine flowers were in full bloom and the stunted trees were fully flushed in their brief burst of growth. Jenny was walking along the very edge of the snowpack when a gleam of light, reflected from deep within the ice, caught her eye. She knelt down and peered into the cool blue depths. And there, suspended as though frozen in time itself, was her watch, twinkling like a diamond in the depths. A cold shiver ran down Jenny's spine as she realized that there, but for the grace of very good fortune indeed, would she also lie beside her timepiece, forever entombed in the glacier's icy embrace. And for the first time since the avalanche, Jenny finally understood. Big Swede had been right all along. She had indeed been blessed with the greatest gift of all that Christmas. She'd been given the gift of her very own life.